everybody, welcome back to Gideon Stuff. Today we have a discussion video and we're talking a little bit about terminology or phraseology, nomenclature that I use here on the channel. I talk a lot about the knives I use in the field or my field knives. I throw these terms around a lot. And a lot of you who are longtime viewers and big fans of the channel, you probably know what I mean when I drop those terms. A lot of you guys know what I do and how I think about a lot of things. But it's come to my attention recently from reading some comments that a lot of people who aren't, watching every single video I release are kind of confused when I use these terms. So today I'm going to kind of explain a couple of things that I use as useful terminology for me. I made a video similar to this. That was a short talking about what I meant when I say ranch knife, because that's another term that I throw around a lot. And these terms are useful to me because I know what I'm talking about, but they may not be useful to everyone who's not me. So we're going to try and clear up some stuff in this video. So for those of you that don't know, I'm a geologist and I spend a lot of time doing field work. I love field geology. And so I spend a lot of time out in the mountains, out in the desert, walking, hiking, making maps, taking measurements, collecting samples. And while I'm doing that, obviously, there's a lot of gear that I keep with on my person. I've already made a video kind of talking about some of this gear. I will link it in a card, or I'll also leave it an end screen at the end of the video. But among my gear are obviously knives. So let's talk about my thought process behind what makes a good field knife. When I say field knife, it means a lot to me because I have certain criteria already in mind as to what a field knife is, right? So let's kind of explain it a little bit here. I'm going to show you two knives that I take with me in the field quite a bit. I was actually in the field this past weekend. This is what I had with me. Cold Steel SRK, love this knife. And the Civivi Vision FG. And for those of you wondering, remember when I made that short about how my Carta kind of sucks sometimes? This is the knife that I had in the field with me when I was talking about, my Carta soaking up sweat and getting gross. We'll talk about that more later on in the video, but yeah, it's this knife. You'll notice, see the color of that side of my Carta? A little bit different from this side. It's because this scale got washed very thoroughly. And now it looks a little bit weird. By the way, I got absolutely ratioed in that short about my Carta. Holy cow, it's like 50% likes and 50% dislikes on that video, which is absolutely atrocious for my channel. So people did not like me talking about stinking my Carta. Anyways, these are two knives that I carry with me out in the field, as well as a Swiss Army knife, but I did not bring it out here with me today because, say it with me, Gideon is an idiot. All right, we all know these. But these are two knives that I take with me in the field a lot. And to me, these are very, very typical of field knives. Now, these knives are kind of different, right? One's a big fixed blade. One's a, regular size folding knife. What makes them field knives? Well, to talk about that, let's go ahead and kind of talk about what I actually use these knives for when I'm doing field work. All right, so let's get the most obvious thing out of the way first. Camp tasks. When we're out in the field, obviously, you got to have a home base. You got to have someplace to come back to sleep and eat your meals and things like that. And that is where my knives see the most use, is around the camp. Making fires, doing food prep, a lot of food prep. And just any other odds and ends that come up. Anything that needs to be cut, ropes, straps, just tasks that you have around your campsite. That's where my knives get a lot of use. Obviously, the SRK is a great knife for bushcrafty type of tasks, making tent pegs, if we need to, batoning through wood. I've made different things to like a hammock structure. I've built different little lean-tos to put gear in and stuff. Very, very helpful tool. Like I said, the food prep is where I put a lot of use into my knives, and that's at camp and while we're hiking around in the field. Obviously got to take my lunch with me, and so when we're camped up in the mountains or we're or we've been hiking all day, and we take a lunch break. The Civivi Vision FG is a great food prep folder. I can cut some fruits, open packages for my lunch. Back at camp, I can get it on a cutting board if I really need to. So that's where a lot of use comes from. But there's also some other reasons why I carry the knives with me. One of the main reasons I make sure I always have my SRK with me is because it's a survival knife. And sometimes things go wrong, right? If something happens and me and my partners end up stranded on top of a mountain, stranded in a valley, we just can't get out of somewhere, it's always good to have a survival tool. Things can go wrong a lot, right? I've talked about on this channel before some things that have gone wrong doing field work, like heat exhaustion, things like that. If you can't get someone to help, one of the best things you can do for heat exhaustion to kind of treat them is to try and cool them down, build them some shade. A lot of times the places we're mapping don't have much shade. So if I can cut down some brush and build a little something to get someone under, it can help a whole lot, right? Just kind of bring that body temperature down. I've talked about how when I was working as a cowboy, when I was working in the mountains a lot, which again, kind of ranch knife things, I've been stranded in the mountains before. I haven't been stranded anywhere doing field work yet, but it could happen, right? Knock on wood that it doesn't happen, but when something does happen, you want to be ready for it. And speaking of, I mentioned the cowboy work kind of things, there is a lot of crossover between what I would consider when I was working in the woods and what I consider nowadays as to what I take out in the field. Obviously, when you're spending days and days out in the desert picking up rocks, you get dusty, right? And it's a really unforgiving environment on folding knives. It's pretty harsh. And so sometimes part of my process in picking a field knife is a knife that I know is going to stand up to the elements. A knife that I carry out in the field a lot is my Cold Steel American Lawman. I love this knife. It's a cold steel, and it has a lot of things that make it desirable to me. It's robust, it has washers in the pivot rather than bearings, and it's made just to be beaten on. Now, on the topic of the bearings thing, obviously, the Vision FG, it has bearings. I have gotten to the point where I kind of know the limits of some of my knives. So this is a knife that absolutely I've taken to the field and it's been fine. I've gotten this thing pretty gummed up, but it was actually fairly easy to clean out. Some bearing knives I have ruined, like completely ruined by doing field work. So just know your knife, kind of know, once you start using different things, you kind of know what works and what doesn't work. One of the reasons I like the Vision FG is because it has a very strong lock. It's very easy to work one-handed, and that's valuable to me. Now the strength of the lock is not as important as it is on like a ranch knife for me, because again, a lot of the tasks my folding knife is going to be seeing are small cutting tasks, food prep, digging splinters, things like that. And most of my big tasks I'm going to relegate or delegate to my fixed blade knife because I have it, right? It's just going to make more sense that way. But I do want my folding knife to be able to resist some heavier use if I'm forced to put it through that roll. Another thing that is vitally important for my folding knife specifically is corrosion resistance, because I'm out there sweating. I'm sweating, right? And my knives get very sweaty and I don't want them to rust. Now this is, again, mostly an issue for the folding knife. My fixed blade is going to be on my belt, so it's not as big of an issue. And typically my multi-tool or Swiss Army knife is in my backpack, so that's not that big of an issue either. But the folding knife in my pocket, I really want to make sure is going to be resistant to getting sweaty. And that entails using knives that have stainless steels or coatings. I like to go for the coating because it just kind of solves the issue completely, right? Even some stainless steels can rust. I want to get some knives that are in like Magna Cut or LC200N or some of these other like super high stain resistant knives and see how they hold up through field work. But as it is, I do prefer knives that have like a coated blade. it really, really helps. All right, now let's talk about some of the fun, specific uses that a geologist has for a pocket knife. Number one, testing a mineral's hardness. Sometimes when you're out in the field, you find a rock and you're like, what the heck is this mineral in this rock? I need to know about this. And there's a lot of things you can use to identify that mineral. Luster, color, hardness. These are the ones that come to most people's mind, you know, anyone that has kind of a passing knowledge of geology. Color is the most useless, and luster sometimes isn't that helpful in the field either. But hardness and cleavage planes, those are really, really helpful. And so especially when I have like my Swiss Army knife, if it has a like maybe a little file or nail pick tool on it, I'll take that and I'll use it to scratch minerals. And that'll tell me a lot about the hardness. And I like using Swiss Army knives because their tools are typically treated a little bit softer, and they typically match up with what I expect minerals to do more than some other steels. When we're talking about mineral hardness, it's the Mohs scale. It goes 1 to 10, 1 being talc, that's very, very soft. You can scratch with your fingernails. 10 being diamond, super, super hard. Steel has a hardness of 5 to 5.5-ish. And that's kind of what I see with Swiss Army knives. I have had knives with higher HRCs and of different compositions maybe punch up a little bit higher. For example, glass has a hardness of around 7. And I have heard that Rockstead, when they heat treat their ZD P189 to 70 plus HRC, it can scratch glass. So that's very, very interesting. But obviously something like that would not be super diagnostic for me, right? I want a steel that's in that hardness of the 4.5 to 5.5 range, right? That'll tell me a whole lot more than a super hard steel would. And obviously when it comes to that, like I talked about having the extra tool on my Swiss Army knife, you don't want to be using like your actual knife, right? You don't want to be scratching with the edge because you're just going to dull your knife. But sometimes I will actually scratch minerals on the side of my blades and see if they scratch the steel. Because if they scratch the steel, that tells me, you know, they're pretty freaking hard, and that's very useful. Another thing I use my knives for is scale photos. So when you're in the field and you see something that you want to take a picture of, you need to include something in the picture that gives a sense of scale. And there's a lot of things you can use to do this. You can use a pencil, you can use, actually let me go grab this real quick. There are actual, you know, things for this job. Things like this, you know, you can point this in the direction of, you know, where north is. You can also point this arrow in like the direction of a plunge or a trend line. But this actually has increments on it, so inches and centimeters, so you know it actually gives a really good sense of scale. But sometimes you don't throw stuff out like that. You can put out your pocket knife and take a picture. And I do this for all kinds of things, like especially if you're looking at like foliations or maybe boudins in like metamorphic rocks. You want to give a sense of how large they are. You put your knife there, you take a picture, and immediately when you show this to someone, they're like, oh, okay, it's about yay big. And, you know, obviously if I'm going to take a picture of something that's like a mineral sample, I wouldn't really use my knife, you know, I'd use something a little bit smaller. But, like in these mountains here, I was actually going to go and take some pictures like this for this video, but I'm not sure if there's a good spot here because we've got this basalt that's kind of capping all of these mountains, and just below the basalt, like let's see if we can see it here, just below the top, see that little white splotch, there's some tuff units. Okay, I guess over there, up the tuff kind of crops out a little bit, and maybe I could go there and see some structures, some features that I could you know, put my knife up against to take some pictures of scale, maybe different, you know, bands, different flow patterns through the tuff. Or heck, I could find like lithics in there if there's inclusions of other rocks that maybe got caught up in a pyroclastic flow or something and got lithified into that ash layer. You know, I could put my knife up against them and show about how big the clasts are. It's really useful. Scales are really useful for sedimentology. You know, if you've got a rock face and you have like little bitty shale turbidites, and then there's like a limestone, and then some shale, limestone, some sand. You know, you've got a little bit of, maybe this was something from like a lake bed. You've got a little bit of data about, you know, rising and falling water conditions, things like that on a very small scale. You can, you know, put your knife there or whatever it is you're taking a reference photo with, and get some idea of the scale when you're showing these pictures to someone else or publishing them in a paper. So to sum up this video, when I say field knife, I mean a knife that I think can stand up to some pretty abusive outdoor environments. Not necessarily a hard use knife. Fixed blades, yeah, definitely kind of hard use, but a knife that can withstand the elements. A knife that I'd feel comfortable taking with me for days and days of field work in pretty unforgiving environments. So next time I unbox a knife and I say, ooh, this is going to be an excellent field knife, or I'm reviewing a knife and I say, yeah, this is the kind of knife that I'd like to take in the field, all it means is it's a knife that I would trust having with me while I'm outside doing work. So it's a term that can apply to a bunch of different knives, but I know I use the term a lot, so I just want to make this video kind of summing it up. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave it a like, comment below, and subscribe. Big shout out to my channel members right here. Love these guys. They do a lot for the channel. If you want to be a member, you can do that by hitting the join button below. I really appreciate it. We've got all kinds of cool stuff going on for members. I think that's going to be it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.